So yeah, I'm just going to pose that question first of all before I go into an introduction about who I am and why I'm standing up here. So I've written up there, what is conceptual artist? What is a conceptual artist? Can everyone see that? Can everyone read it okay, yeah? 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 Okay. So what is a conceptual artist? All right, so just have a think. You're all in various different levels of your art career here and your art education. So some of you might go, God, that's a basic question. And others of you might be thinking, I don't really have a clue. But think maybe about this word here, and it might give you a clue. Does anyone want to have a stab at what a conceptual artist is or what a conceptual artist does?
It's weird stuff.
Weird stuff, okay. That's, yeah.
Someone's got to say.
Weird stuff, okay. Weird stuff. Can anyone elaborate on that? Because if we looked it up in the dictionary, maybe we wouldn't just maybe we wouldn't get weird stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, concept is an idea, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Okay. So, if a sculptor is an artist that deals with shape and form, a conceptual artist is an artist concerned with
ideas.
Ideas. Yes, correct. So a conceptual artist is an artist whose material is ideas, okay? And this is where we get into weird stuff territory, all right? Because for a lot of us, maybe those of us who've been taught a very traditional route in art and design, this notion of an idea being a material is maybe quite challenging and quite unusual. Hi everyone, do you want to just move in? There's some space, you can sit on the front here, or you can just duck yourself at the back there, but you won't be able to see at the back there, so you just want to filter in.
Come on this way.
Yeah.
We can see the screen.
Yeah, you can perch maybe at the table back. Can you see this screen?
Yes.
Yes? No, keep moving in then. Keep moving in.
No, we'll go for this one here even. That's it.
Okay, so far all you've missed is the fact we've established what a conceptual artist is. A conceptual artist is an artist that deals with weird stuff or ideas. Ideas are their material, okay? So that was the question you were all going to be conjugating and considering as you came in, and now we've speeded that up a little bit. So this is who I am. That's my name. I am Charlie Barnes, and I am a conceptual artist, okay? I am an artist that does weird stuff. I am an artist that deals with ideas, okay? They're my primary material. Okay, and I've said there, I deal with process and ideas through a sculptural practice, okay? So I could call myself a sculptor, but actually the starting point for my work is concept, it's idea, okay? And that's the thing I'm primarily most bothered about, so that's why I'm calling myself a conceptual artist as opposed to a sculptor, okay? I am interested in the relationship between function and value, okay? So function, how something works, and value. So that's not just what something costs, it's everything has value, okay? Our ideas, our concepts, our beliefs, they are your values, but they also have value, okay? How important one pair of trainers is to you over another pair of trainers is based on your own ideas about value. That might be sentimental, that might be monetary, that might be political, okay? So you have all these things that get thrown into what value is. So I'm interested in that relationship. And at the bottom there, there's a little list of, there's one missing actually, there's a little list of my qualifications, how I got to where I am today. So I started off by doing a foundation degree in art and design, which some of the students here are on. Not this degree, this foundation degree, but some of you are doing that at the moment. And some of you in the lower levels, you may go on to do a foundation before you go on to degree. Then I did my BA in Contemporary Fine Art, which I know a lot of you here are on your BA, and then I went on to do my Masters in Fine Art. Okay, and since I've done that, I've also done my PGCE, which is my teaching qualification, which sort of allows me to be in a building like this telling you all sorts of things and saying I know what I'm talking about. So that's basically my trajectory to where I am now. So we've answered that one. And what I wanted to do today was talk you through my kind of journey, if you like, okay? So going through from being an undergraduate, sort of starting to work out, starting to put down everything I'd done at A-level, everything I'd done at foundation, sort of going, well, who am I as an artist? What sort of stuff do I want to make? And the first work I'm going to talk to you about is this one, which is, I called prosthesis attachment. and it was the first time I made an artwork that started with an idea. So I got really interested in this idea of phones and the fact that, I mean, you can tell this was made a while ago because the style of phone has changed, but this at the time, this shape of an iPhone was cutting edge, believe it or not. This was like the model that was out and everyone wanted it or had it. And it was this explosion of smartphones, and it was like, wow, and everyone slowly, and some of you in the room who were older than maybe 10 at the time will remember there was all of a sudden a cultural change about people becoming more obsessed and more interested in smartphones and technologies and becoming really attached to them. So I started to explore this idea of this physical thing that we kept with us all the time that was really important, and the value of it, far outstripping the value of what it cost initially. It became embedded with all our photographs and all our memories and all our personal contacts. It became like a little locket or a little personal piece of information that we had to keep close to us. So I sort of thought, how can I make something that sort of explores that and how these kind of personal values get loaded into an object. So I made an iPhone, and I made it. I sculpted this out of plaster. I carved it from solid block, but I made it so I weighted it. I weighted it with coins. So actually, when you picked it up and you held it in your hand, it had the same weight as an iPhone. So if you were blindfolded and you picked this up, it felt exactly the same. But actually, it had none of that function. All that function was removed. So it was really starting to toy with this idea of function and value. And it really started, I didn't know that at the time, but it started to set up this context, if you like, for maybe where my ideas were and what I was thinking about. So that's what I made. So I made that in 2009, that's the second year of my degree. And then those ideas fed into what I took forward in the third year of my degree. And I became really interested in this kind of duality, because at the time loads of people were talking about having avatars or getting married to an avatar or living a lot of their lives online. And I became quite interested in this idea of people increasingly spending time online, so living in online, virtual contexts, and not necessarily living in real ones. And for a lot of you sitting in this room, you're going, well, that's just really normal now. But actually, that was a thing, and that was a transition. Okay, so we've gone from this time when people were spending more and more time on these social media networks, on these other platforms. But internet wasn't quite what it is today. And we were actually spending a lot of time waiting online for stuff to load. And I made an installation that sort of played between this real and artificial space. So what I did was I made a room for my degree show, a complete room. It was almost the size of this. Okay, this picture of it here. And from the outside it looked like a stage or a set. It was very makeshift and wood and everything. And you went through this door here and you went into this room. And I wallpapered it, I carpeted it, I had skirting boards on there. I had a little architrave around the ceiling, there was a light hanging down. I had chairs that I'd nicked from somewhere in the university. I had a important plastic pot plant in the corner. There was a mirror, there was magazines. It was a waiting room, okay? And what I did in the corner of this waiting room, I made a little animation, which was a loading bar, which took 9 minutes to load, okay? And it got to like 98% really, really quickly, and then took about 7 minutes to get to that last little bit, okay? So it was making a room where people were physically waiting. Because of 9 minutes was because the average time at that time that people were spending online waiting for stuff to load up. Okay, so we were physically all spending that time every day. We didn't realise it because it was cumulative. And people went in, and they sat down, and the door automatically shut behind you, so you had to go out the other door. So we would sort of sit down and look at a magazine and watch this loading bar and think, well, it's going to come on in a minute, it's going to come on in a minute. And it wouldn't, it just perpetually reload, okay? Also in the room, I had a clock, which ticked really loudly, so you were really aware of the time. And in the clock, there was a webcam. And the webcam took you to the next space. So when you'd been in that space, you got frustrated or annoyed, or you'd read the magazine and wandered off, you'd go through the next door, and you went into the next space, and there was a computer screen with a live feed going from that room to the computer screen, which was actually online at the same time, showing people waiting in the room, sat there waiting for something to happen, like you'd just been. So people were physically waiting online as well as waiting in real time. So it was an installation, but it was also a performance. Technically it had a real and an online site, And I was playing with all these ideas about function and value and all these things connect. So that was that work. And then I kind of got to the end of my degree and went, I've got so many more questions and not very many answers, so I'm going to do a master's. So I went straight into my master's, and it was that point where I sort of thought, right, well, my ideas have become so conceptual and so based around the idea. I lacked a sense of having a relationship with stuff and a relationship with place. And in this whole time I had been making a lot of things that had to do with space. So what I did was I started to record spaces, draw spaces. And I moved around my university building. And I found little corners that were sort of forgotten and left about, or just sort of corners of corridors that were weird. And I started to make casts of them. And inverted casts of them, and I started to record these spaces and cast them. They weren't important in themselves, they were very unmonumental and very insignificant. But I was sort of exploring what's interesting about taking something like the boring corner of a room and elevating that or removing that, and how does that function? Is it just a piece of corridor? Is it just a piece of space that people walk past? And this was exhibited. I made about 500 of these, and they were laid out in a place in York, which is no longer there as a gallery, unfortunately, but it was called Bar Lane Studios, and they covered the floor. And people were actually then walking around these things and sort of really looking at them and thinking about them as spaces in a place which had been kind of inconsequential, really. At the same time, I went down to London and I went to the Saatchi, and I saw this in the basement of the Saatchi. On this work, who's been to the Saatchi? I know a few people have. Yeah, so if you've ever been down to the basement, there's a work in there by an artist called Richard Wilson, and it was made in 1987, and you walk in and you think there's oil painting or something because there's this really heady smell, and basically there's a walkway here but the whole room is filled with oil, okay? So it completely mirrors the entire space that you're in. And I became obsessed with this work because you wanted to touch the surface but you couldn't because it was oil and then all over you, but so there was playing with sense. You could smell it, you could physically walk into it, so it was spatial, it was optical. But at the time I couldn't articulate that, and I became so ineffable about it, I just became so encapsulated about it. But what I ultimately pinned down and realised it was because it was real. It wasn't a representation of something, it was real oil in a real space that completely transformed my relationship with the space. So how just by putting one material in somewhere, it completely changed something into an artwork, and it completely changed the way I interacted with that space. And that made me think about function again, and that made me think about, well, how do materials and objects change our function? So I was wandering around the university, I was getting into trouble because I started to do a lot of things by moving stuff. So I started unscrewing vents from walls and placing them on other walls and adding extra vents on walls. And I was sort of exploring how these spaces we pass all the time, these non-places, we don't really notice, but they're kind of an ever-present part of our daily lives. And I started to explore that language in bringing objects together. So I started combining things like light switches and coat hangers, or handrails and pull cords, and making these sort of junk sculptures and connections with objects, or spending a long time. I did a whole series of hand-carved air vents that took me hours, because it was about this relationship of my value as an artist. I am carving something, the time I put into something, and in turn the relationship that casts and that gives to an object. So it was kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, kind of a bit like Secret Anarchy in a way, but I was also kind of trying to unpick about what is this idea that I'm trying to get about, what am I trying to explore here? And I think the point was I wasn't finding idea and making the artwork, I was actually inquiring through making, yeah? And we all want to get to that point. When you go into an artwork making something and you're actually answering a question or asking a question, it's far more interesting than just performing the thing that you've got in your head. So what I realised, and I became very interested in the work of Martin Boyce, became one of my artists that I was really influenced in at the time, was this idea that space becomes a place through the act of using it in some way. So you've got Michael de Soto on there who said that in the Practice of Everyday Life. And that's the idea that these non-places, so if you think of a non-place as a motorway service station, a corridor, an airport lounge, the places we all know, they all kind of look the same. You know when you pull into a transport cafe, like, you know, a motorway services, and you go, I've been to this one before, and you kind of get that feeling. It's because they're all the same, they're all this sort of non-place. And actually they're the complete opposite from places which are important to us. So I became really interested in this notion of non-space, this notion of things being between or liminal. So I decided I wanted to see if I could make a work that was a non-place, a non-thing, but actually was really quite impactful. So I got a gallery in York to let us have a little MA exhibition. And just here in this gallery was a doorway. And I built this, and people walked in, and you can see the back of it. They're completely constructed, completely artificial, but the front of it was this blank wall, and it looked like a solid structure as you walked in. So it had these blank plates in it, and it was all completely smooth and solid. And people walked in, and it was uncomfortably close to the door, so you sort of walked in, and you sort of had to awkwardly walk round it. And they knew there was 3 works in the space because that had been heavily articulated, and one was clearly marked, and another one was clearly marked. And you sort of saw people going around scratching their head going, where is it, or leaning at the back of it, or